Welcome to The Hornet. I'm Rob Hornby, co-CEO of global consulting firm Alex Partners, and this is a collection of my perspectives on AI. Episode 4. We are hallucinating in an AI hyperreality. Perhaps it's just overexposure or end-of-year fatigue, but to me, the AI debate seems to be increasingly unhinged. I've recently attended several AI forums where incredible claims were presented as if they were mundane facts. Examples include the imminent arrival of artificial general intelligence, AGI, and the already widespread business use of sophisticated autonomous agents, plus generative platforms that are driving such prolific productivity gains that many companies have stopped hiring, and viable quantum computing by the end of the decade. However, I do not see any evidence of this happening on the ground, and there is a distinct lack of corroborating scientific research. In fact, the AAAI 2025 presidential panel found that 76% of surveyed researchers believed the scaling up of large language models was unlikely or very unlikely to ever achieve AGI. Multiple studies show that most agentic AI deployments remain confined to pilots, and even then with high failure rates. Yale's Budget Lab finds no AI-driven disruption of the overall US labor market so far, despite some nascent signals in specific occupations, and the scientific consensus on quantum computing is 2035 to 2040. This gap between claim and evidence initially mystified me, but then I had a light bulb moment. The public discourse on AI is behaving exactly like a large language model. Yes, I know this sounds like I need to immediately step away from my computer and go for a walk in the woods. But let me explain. In simple terms, large language models are vast, multidimensional spaces where each token, the basic building block of language, occupies its own unique position. If tokens are too confusing, just think words instead. Tokens that frequently appear together in training data also form clusters within this virtual space, and after training, the same algorithm tends to select token groups close to those in the prompt to generate a response. In essence, repeated language patterns form an internal map of reality, which is used to provide responses to prompts. This can be depicted in shorthand as repetition leads to representational reality, providing a response. The challenge is that large language models have no means of verifying whether their repeated patterns correspond to the real world. AI can just as easily be trained on fantasy data, depicting an imagined realm, just as platforms like Novel AI do for entertainment purposes. However, in most situations, the model is intended to represent the verifiable universe, at least approximately. Outputs that arise from gaps between the internal representation and the external reality it's supposed to describe are called hallucinations, and most people consider them a significant problem. If the representation versus reality gap becomes a chasm, we drift into what Jean Baudrillard called hyperreality, a world where representations refer only to other representations, not to anything real. Now, back to my theory on the AI debate. If repetition leads to representational reality and subsequent responses, then repeated patterns of inflated, inaccurate, and ungrounded claims about AI have created a distorted language map of the entire subject, which in turn leads to the wrong outputs and actions. Well-informed contributions rooted in empirical data have been overwhelmed by exaggerated pitches, futurist imaginations, magical thinking, media hyperbole, and even science fiction. When hype is dominant and repeated, it soon becomes the common narrative, and eventually an illusion of fact. As a result, we are hallucinating in an AI hyperreality. This matters because individuals, companies, and governments are making consequential decisions about where to invest, legislate, regulate, and educate based on these distorted narratives. Just as with a large language model, addressing this problem requires retraining, and I believe the process begins at the individual level. Critically examining the sources of our AI information is a good first step. Narratives from the AI sector are most prone to self-serving overreach. Mainstream technology journalism is often excellent, but sometimes prioritizes personalities over analysis, ignores mainstream business, and fails to hold vendors accountable. Sane alternatives at the optimistic end of the spectrum include Ethan Mollick, Stanford HAI, and the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy. Specific anti-hype perspectives can be found at AI as Normal Technology, and blogs by independent experts such as Gary Marcus and Rodney Brooks. The Stanford Digital Economy Lab and Yale Budget Lab offer hard-headed analysis on AI productivity and job impacts. These sources do not necessarily agree, but they all adhere to a form of evidence-based, rational discussion. Once we've narrowed our own hyperreality gap, business leaders can 1. Engage in public discussions seeking evidence, rational argument, and direct experience. This does not need to be any more confrontational than asking, how did you reach that conclusion? 2. Scrutinize internal AI proposals on the same evidence-first basis, then collect rigorous data during pilot before authorizing any scaled rollout. 3. Ask vendors and consultants to provide cases and references when pitching. Ask to speak to the CFO of a previous client to check benefits. 4. Find a place to have honest dialogue with peers and advisors in which there is no distorting vested interest. 5. Encourage constructive internal dissent in our organizations to make it easier to speak truth to power on AI. To be clear, I'm not an AI skeptic and believe we are at the start of another genuine technology-led revolution. I also know that current AI can drive productivity if applied correctly. All I'm advocating for is a public debate that represents a true reflection of progress, not where we imagine or wish ourselves to be. The opposite of a hallucination is apparently veridical perception, which is not very catchy, so I'll happily settle for a hinged AI discussion instead. That way, repetition will lead us to real reality and then informed responses and actions.